You even noticed how politics is a lot like poker. Everyone's bluffing until somebody flips the cards. And that's exactly what just happened. Chuck Schumer thought he could corner Trump with a government shutdown, but instead Trump called his bluff and dropped an absolute bombshell that no one in Washington saw coming. In one move, he forced Democrats to defend the very same corporate giants they would be spent decades attacking. And while that truth exploded in DC, another meltdown was already underway in New York. Just days after Manny's big win, his so-called progressive revolution is collapsing faster than the city's tax base, sending no big investors, families, and billionaires on private jets straight to Florida. A real estate toll of two inflations. Skuma political gamble and Mamani's economic disaster, and they both reveal the same thing. When leaders build their power on illusion, reality eventually catches up. So today, we are breaking down how Trump's latest move didn't just shape the balance of power, it exposed the truth about what's really driving America's next big transformation. Let me point you a picture of how we got here because the setup matters. The government being shut down. Actually, it became the longest shutdown in the nation's history. Now, shutdowns are not new. You will be seen them before. Honestly, most Americans have gotten pretty tired of the political theater that usually surrounds them. But this one's different because buried in the middle of all the usual partition scubbling is something that most people weren't paying attention to until recently. See, the Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer in Senate, decided they had leverage. They figured we will hold the government hostage until we got what we want on healthcare subsidies. Specifically, they want Obamacare subsidies extended hundreds attention until recently. See, the Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer in the Senate, decided they had leverage. They figured we'll hold the government hostage until we get what we want, a healthcare subsidies. Especially, they wanted Obamacare subsidies extended hundreds of billions of dollars flowing to insurance companies with the argument that this helped afford health care. On the surface, that might sound reasonable, right? Healthcare is expensive. People need help. Subsidies seem like the compassionate choice, but here's where it gets interesting. And this is something I think a lot of folk our age understand instinctively because we'll be seeing how these things work over the decades. Just because money gets labeled as helping people does not mean that's where it actually ends up. Skumar's proposal was not just about extending help for another year. It was poison pilled, as they say in Washington, loaded up with bonuses for insurance providers. Billions and billions going straight to the companies themselves with zero actual generators. Later premiums would go down even a penny. In fact, some estimates suggested that around 20 to 30% of these subsidies were fraudulent money disappearing into administrative black holes or wars. Covering healthcare cost for people who weren't even supposed to be in the system in the first place. Now, Schumer thought he had Republicans in a corner. The calculation was simple. Republicans would face enormous pressure as the shutdown dragged on. Military personnel not getting paid, air traffic controllers working without paychecks, thousands of federal workers caught in the middle. The longer it went, the more Republicans would get blamed, or so the thinking went. Eventually, they would be caved. Democrats would get their subsidies, and heading into midterm elections, they would had something no campaign on. It was a classic Washington setup, very predictable, very traditional political hardball. Except there was one fatal flaw in the whole strategy. The flaw was assuming that Donald Trump plays by traditional rules. He does not negotiate from fear. He does not operate on the usual timeline of political pressure. Instead, he waits. He watches, and when the moment's right, he does not just respond to young mob. He changes the entire game you are playing. That's exactly what happened. Trump watched Schumer make his proposal public. Watch Democrats line up behind it. Was the media frame it as a reasonable compromise? Then he waited exactly one day, just long enough for everyone to commit to their positions and drop what can only be described as a political bombshell. Trump posted on Truth Social and said in effect, "You want to spend hundreds of billions on healthcare. Fine, but let's stop sending it to money chucking insurance corporations. Let's send it directly to the American people so they can buy their own healthcare and have money left over." Now, let me break down why this is so brilliant, because it's the kind of move that reveals how someone thinks several steps ahead. First, on the policy level, Trump's proposal essentially suggested creating something like health saving accounts on a national scale. Think of it like the education saving accounts that exist in many states. The government provides funds into a special account and you decide how to spend it on healthcare related expenses. Doctor visits, medications, treatments, preventive care. You are in control. This kind of approach does a few things at once. It puts decision making power back in your hands rather than in the hands of insurance company bureaucrats. It creates actual market competition because providers have to compete for your business. And your perhaps most importantly, it cuts out the massive middleman cost and potential fraud that come with funneling everything through insurance corporations. But here's the political genius of the move. And this is what has Democrats absolutely scrambling right now. Trump just forced them into a position where they have to argue against giving money directly to the American people. Think about that for a second. The party that spent decades positioning itself as the champion of the working class. The party that reigns evening. Insurance company executive instead of the regular Americans. It's a complete reversal of the expected political optics. Suddenly, Republicans are the ones saying, let's give in the people control and cut out corporate middlemen, while Democrats are stuck defending a system that enriches some of the most profitable corporations in America. How did it happen? The answer is that Democrats painted themselves into a corner by building so much of their healthcare policy around Obamacare. They are so invested in their framework politically, ideologically, structurally that they can't provide without essentially admitting the whole thing was designed more to benefit insurance companies than to genuinely put healthcare in reach of average Americans. Senator Chris Murphy called Trump's proposal nonsensical, but he did not really explain why giving people money to buy their own healthcare is nonsensical. Online liberal activities started melting down, but again without a coherent counterargument beyond "we can't let Trump win." Some Democratic senators who usually the party the line started making nervous comments about how maybe we need to look at the alternatives. There's the sound of bluff being called the person who made the bluff, realizing they are holding nothing but bad cards. Meanwhile, Republicans smell blood in the water. Senator Rick Scott from Florida immediately announced his rating legalization of implement transmission actual health saving accounts that let Americans choose their own healthcare plans. Free market principles meeting populist direct support. Even Lindsey Graham, who's normally a pretty good barometer for her Senate, Republicans are willing to go. Call transplant simply brilliant. But let's zoom out for a moment, because while this healthcare chase match was playing out in Washington, something equally dramatic was happening. 100, 1,500 miles to the northeast in these two stories. Trump outmaneuvering Schumer and what's happening in New York. They are actually two sides of the same coin. We will be heard about Zoran Mamdani winning the New York City mayor's race recently. Progressive candidate ran on a platform of equity, free programs, social justice, the whole package. Media called it a new chapter for the city. Supporters were skeptics. The champagne was flowing on election night. And then the champagne kept flowing and flowing. Literally within 72 hours of winning. The scandal started playing up faster than marathon real estate listening. Fast, it came out of the Mandani, the self-described democratic socialist who spent his entire campaign demonizing the wealthy. Headed off to the luxury resort in Puerto Rico for some kind of high-dollar conference with major democratic donors and negotiates. The guy who promised to give away a fiber free stuff to working people immediately went to party with political insiders at a place where rooms probably cost more per night than what many his supporters make in a week. The hypocrisy was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but it got worse. Mandane announced his transition team made a big show of it being all women, but when people actually looked at who these women they are, things got interesting. The co-chair turned out to be someone deeply connected to what some call dark money networks with ties going back to the most establishment democratic circles you can imagine. This was supposed to be the guy who was going to disrupt the establishment, during the local swarm of bringing fresh voices to City Hall. Instead, he was filling his administration with the exact same recycled political operatives from previous failed administration people from the Delaseco era, the Blumberg years, Biden's Washington, the same cast of characters who had President our New York's decline, just with new titles. And then Mandani turned around and asked his supporter for money. After winning after the election was over, he sent out fundraising appeals asking people to help fund his transition. Even the transition are fully paid for by state funds. The guy who promised free everything immediately started asking the people who vote for him to pay up. You don't make this stuff up. The speed of it all, the whiplash between election night promises and week one reality. It created something interesting. It criticized a doubt even among people who vote for him. You started hearing this question, where did we just get played? But this question, where did we just get played? But the because Mandana's win and more importantly, he immediate betrayal of the image he would entirely. Something miserable, something you could track in real time. People started leaving, not metaphorically, literally. They started booking flights, calling moving companies, and most tellingly calling real estate agents in Florida. Now we are not talking about a few folks here and they're deciding to retire. Somewhere a warm. We are talking about a surge. A wave of wealthy and even middle class New Yorkers suddenly deciding that maybe they would rather not stick around to see how this experiment turns out. Private jet booking services reported a spike of somewhere between 40 and 50% in flight requests from New York to Florida in the first couple days after Mondani's win. 40 to 50% increase is not formal and normal function. There's people fleeing and where they are going. Mostly Palm Beach, areas near Mar-a-Lago, Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, places where the governor has spent years building a reputation for competition, low taxes, and respect for personal freedom. Places that stayed open during times when New York was locked down. Places that have become symbols of an alternative approach to governance. One Miami real estate developer reported signing over 100 million in contracts from nervous when new workers in just a few months, building doubling what they would be done the entire previous year. Properties that normally would sit on the market through Thanksgiving were entering contracts within days. The Florida real estate market did not just heat up, It caught fire, and here's the twist that nobody saw coming. It was not even new workers buying most of these properties yet. In was freelance, local investors and residents rushing into purchase luxury waterfront properties before the unexpected wave of New York refugees arrived and drove prices through the roof. Think about that. People in Florida were essentially fund running the exodus, betting that the flood of displaced New Yorkers would create coach demand that anything they bought now would be worth significantly more in a matter of months. One real estate agent down there called Mamdani CO2. And honestly, that comparison makes sense. Remember during the pandemic how Florida became this big one. This refuge for people who wanted to live normally, work freely, send their kids to school, run their businesses. Millions of people discovered that there was an alternative to the lockdown restrictive approach taken by places like New York and California. Florida became symbol of something bigger than just a state. It became a symbol of choice, of trusting people to make their own decisions. Now history is repeating itself, except this time it's not a virus people are fleeing, it's a politician. It's the people are fleeing, it's a politician. It's a realization that the promises made were hollow, that the progressive utopia being sold was just another way of concentration power in the hands of people who don't trust you to run your own life. And when people reach that realization, they vote with their feet. They pick up decades of memories, leave behind, and hit somewhere that respect them enough to let them go. That kind of movement, that's not politics, that's physics. That's human nature asserting itself against system. But Trump's 2024 coalition, which included huge numbers of working class voters, Latino voters, young men, disaffected independents, uh, a lot of them either stayed home or even drifted back toward Democrats in these recent local races. Why? Because they felt like the promises made to them were being forgotten. They felt like Trump was spending more time and energy on Middle East policy than on Middle America. They felt like their economic struggles, the cost of groceries, the cost of gas, the cost of healthcare were not being treated as priorities. There's a wake up call that Tuesday results delivered, and ETF's Trump got the message loud and clear because everything he's done since the healthcare bombshell, the meat investigation, the mortgage proposal, it's all targeted directly at those exit concerns. It's a pivot back to the America First kitchen table economics that built the coalition in the first place. This is why the shutdown ironically might turn out to be the best thing that could have happened for Trump politically. It gave him a stage to reframe the entire conversation around trust, around who's fighting for regular people versus who's fighting for corporate interests and political machines. And every day the shutdown continues with Schumer stubbornly defending insurance company subsidies. It reinforces that frame. Every day Mamdani is in the news for another tone, leaf, move, or luxury gateway. It reinforces the broader narrative that progressive leadership is performative rather than practical. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. This all sounds great in theory, but what does it actually mean for me? How does any of this affect my life? Fair question. Let me bring it down to earth. If Trump's health saving account proposal actually becomes law, you could potentially have more control over your healthcare spending and more options for how you receive care. Instead of being locked into whatever plan your insurance company offers, you would have funds you could direct toward the doctor's treatments approaches that actually work for you. If the DOJ investigation into food prices leads to real action against monopolistic practices, you might see your grocery bills stabilize or even decrease. Same with the mortgage proposals. If your grandparents can actually afford to buy a home because payment structures become more flexible, they change their lives and your family future. And if the trend of people fleeing mismanaged cities continues, you might fleeing mismanaged cities continues. We might see a broader transformation in how America organizes itself. Not everyone packed into massive urban centers controlled by political machines, but spread out into smaller, more responsive communities where your voice actually matters and your vote counts for something. Some people are calling this Vision Freedom Cities, new communities built around the principles of innovation, choose, and personal responsibility rather than bureaucratic control. Places where remote work means you can live anywhere, where energy independence means you are not dependent on coastal cities for your power, where local governments actually respond to local needs instead of copying whatever is trending in the New York or San Francisco. It's not just a political vision, it's a practical response to failure we've been watching unfold, and it's already happening. The migration from New York to Florida is just the most visible example. The people are also moving to Texas. Tense the colonists is a home on a place that offers space, affordability, the governments that largely leave you alone to live your life. This is the flip side or debate. It's decentralization. It's the recognition that the old model of concentrating everything in a handful of massive cities controlled by a handful of political machines that does not work for most people anymore. And technology now makes it possible to live well, work productively, and stay connected from just about anywhere. That's something I think our elder folks understand instinctively, even if you don't not grow up with all the technology that makes it possible. Remember when communities were more local, when you knew your neighbors, when local businesses were owned by people you actually knew. The internet and remote work are making that possible again, just in a new form. And when leadership, whether it's Trump reshaping the Republican Party or governors like dentists building alternatives to failed progressive policies, when leadership catches up with where people are already moving, that's when real change becomes possible. So let's bring both threads together one final time because they really are telling the same story from different angles. Schumer's blast failed because it was based on fear. Fear the Republican would came under pressure felt that Americans would not notice the billions were going to insurance companies instead of to them. Trump called the bluff by offering something better, deep support, personal control, and trust in citizens to make their own choices. Mandans rapid collapse happened because this entire campaign was built on fantasy. The fantasy that progressive policies work despite decades of evidence to the contrary. The fantasy that you can promise everything to everyone without consequences. The fantasy betrayed everything you claim to stand for. Trump's bombshell healthcare proposal did not just respond to Schumer's offer. It reframed the entire debate. It turned defense into offense. It made Democrats the ones defending corporate interests while Republicans championed direct support for regular people. It showed that truth can become clarity when you have to courage to call out a broken system and propose something fundamentally different. And there's the leadership lesson in all of this. The thing I think is worth holding on to as we watch how this all plays out. Real leadership is not about having all the answers. It's about trusting people enough to let them find their own answers. It's about removing obstacles rather than creating dependencies. It's about results instead of rhetoric. The government, we are seeing people fleeing failed cities, voters rejecting establishment candidates, citizens demanding governments that actually work for them. It's not partisan. It's not left or right in the traditional sense. It's a rejection of incompetence dressed up as expertise. It's a rejection of control disguised as compassion. If you want to know where America's headed, just follow where trust and people are moving. Flow where families feel safe, where businesses can thrive, where communities function without being micromanaged from distant capitals. Flow where leaders say, I trust you, instead of I will take care of you. That's the future taking shape right now in real time in the decision of millions of individual people who are simply choosing to live somewhere that respect them. Iskoma and Mandan represent the old model, that one collapsing under its own weight. Trump's latest move represents something different. I bet that Americans, given the choose the resources, will make better decisions for themselves than any government bureaucrat or corporate executive ever could. We are watching a realignment happen. The question is not whether it will continue, it will. The question is whether political leadership will recognize it and adapt, or whether they will keep doubling down to approaches that have already failed, losing more trust and more people with every passing year. As for me, I am optimistic. I would be seen enough to know what happened. The American people decide they would had enough of something. They change it. Sometimes it takes a while, sometimes it's messy, but it happens. And right now, the momentum is shifting toward trusting people, toward letting communities flourish, toward leadership that serves rather than controls. That's not a left or right thing, that's an American thing. And it's worth fighting for some. Here's what I want to ask you. If you believe leadership should serve people, not corporation or political machines. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for tomorrow's deep dive, and drop a comment below. Do you think Democrats will double down or finally admit they would be outplayed? I read every comment and I genuinely want to know what you are thinking as well as this unfolds. Because at the end of the day, this is not really about Trump or Schumer or Mandani or any individual politicians. It's about whether we are going to have a country where people are trusted to run their own lives, or one where every decision gets made by someone in a distant office who never walked in your shoes. I know which one I'm betting on, and I think you do.